Lost language, decoded.
Look at them, etched into stone, covering temple walls, decorating tombs. These are Egyptian hieroglyphs, and they are just instantly recognizable.
Absolutely. Beautiful, mysterious symbols.
Yeah. And for centuries, they were just a complete enigma. But they weren't just, pretty pictures. They were a powerful, complex language, the language of ancient Egypt.
And the name the ancient Egyptians themselves had for this crypt, Medu Neter, that translates to the God's words.
The God's words.
Yeah, and that really tells you how profound they believed it was.
Yeah.
They saw writing itself as, well, a divine creation, a gift.
That's such a different way of thinking about writing compared to us today.
Yeah.
And you can see that reverence, that feeling, even in how early outsiders saw them. The name hieroglyph itself.
Right, from the Greek, hier meaning holy, and glypho meaning writing.
So even Greek observers like Herodotus, they saw them mostly as sacred carvings, something special.
Exactly. And that perception that they were purely sacred or symbolic, not a functional, practical language,
Right.
that actually turned out to be a huge barrier for a long, long time for anyone trying to understand them.
Well, we are going to try and peel back those layers for you today. We've got
Wow.
the sources right here, and our mission in this deep dive is to unpack the whole fascinating story of Egyptian hieroglyphs.
We'll look at their history, how the system worked.
How their meaning vanished for, over a 1,000 years? And then the incredible story of their decipherment. Think of this as your shortcut to really seeing what those symbols on the walls are actually saying.
So where do we start? Their origins, I suppose. It's not like one single event.
No, it never is with ancient scripts, is it?
The exact beginnings are still debated, but the sources do point towards, well, an evolution from earlier ways of communicating visually.
Like what? Are we talking cave paintings, that kind of thing?
Potentially, yeah. Drawing on older traditions, like rock pictures from prehistoric hunters in the desert. They were already using visual images. Then, as society got more complex, you start seeing symbols on pottery, especially in pre-dynastic cultures around the Naqada II period. It suggests a growing use of visual signs.
Okay, so the building blocks, the visual language was kind of already there. When do they start looking like the hieroglyphs we know and actually being used as, writing?
The earliest examples we can confidently date that look like real hieroglyphic writing, they come from a very specific place, tombs.
Tombs. Okay.
Tombs from the Naqada III period, sometimes called Dynasty Zero, right at the dawn of unified Egypt, so roughly 3,200 to 3,000 BCE.
Wow, over 5,000 years ago. Where exactly were these found?
The sources really highlight one discovery as key, a tomb in Abydos, Cemetery U, Tomb J specifically, dated around 3,100 BCE.
Ah, and inside they found
A collection of small labels.
the Abydos labels. Right, I've seen pictures, tiny things carved on wood or ivory. They look so delicate.
They are, and amazingly, about 150 survived, even though the tomb was looted pretty badly. These little labels are some of the absolute earliest bits of writing from Egypt.
So what did they say? Was it like the first pharaoh writing down his great deeds?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But no, not at all. Not these earliest ones. The inscriptions are surprisingly practical.
Practical, how so?
They show numbers, they indicate where goods came from, administrative stuff, basically, records about the economy, linked to whoever was buried there, probably an early ruler.
Huh.
We also see similar signs on pottery and stone vessels from that time, probably indicating ownership, maybe linked to early taxes or accounting.
So writing, in its very first documented form here, seems really tied to, managing stuff, tracking goods, administration. That's not what I expected.
It really shows how practicality might have driven the initial development, the standardization of these signs. But the sources also show that writing appeared very quickly in royal art too, around 3000 BCE.
Ah, okay, like on ceremonial objects.
Exactly that. Things like ceremonial mace heads, funerary stelae, using writing to commemorate what the royals did. The Narmer palette is another famous early one.
Right, the palette.
It beautifully mixes images and some of these early signs. It's clearly using writing to legitimize and record state power.
Okay, so it goes from practical labels and bean counting pretty quickly to royal propaganda and recording history. That's quite a jump.
It is. And it didn't stop there. The sources point out the shift to more complex uses, literature, religious texts.
Right.
The oldest known Egyptian literature we have, the pyramid texts, they appear engraved inside pyramids around 2500 BCE.
Those are the spells and prayers meant to help the king get to the afterlife.
Precisely. And then later, around 2000 BCE, you get the coffin texts, similar magical spells, but written on coffins. So those afterlife benefits became accessible to more people, not just the king.
That's a fascinating journey from admin notes to these elaborate religious texts. It shows how versatile the system became. But how did it actually work? Because it's obviously more than just drawing a picture of a bird to mean bird.
Oh, far more sophisticated. Hieroglyphs are a really complex system. They're made up of 3 basic types of signs, often used together in the same word. 3 types.
Okay.
You've got logograms, phonograms, and determinatives.
Okay, let's break those down. Logograms first. What's that?
A logogram is basically a sign that stands for a whole word. Think of it like an ideogram almost. The sources use the example of the hieroglyph for a house.
Okay.
It looks like a plan of a house, and it can be read pretio, which means house.
So a picture of a house means house. Simple enough.
Yeah, and when it's used that way, as a logogram, it often has a little vertical stroke next to it or under it. That stroke basically tells you, read this sign for the word it depicts.
Got it. A little flag saying this picture is the word. Okay, what about phonograms? This is where it gets more complicated, yeah.
This is where it gets really clever, and understanding this was absolutely key to cracking the code later on. Phonograms represent sounds, not whole words.
Sounds, like letters.
Sort of. They work on the rebus principle, like drawing an eye on a saw to mean I saw.
Ah, okay. Using pictures to represent sounds based on the word for the picture.
Exactly. And crucially, Egyptian hieroglyphs mostly write consonants. They usually left out the vowels, much like some modern scripts like Arabic or Hebrew.
Right, like abjads. So vowels were just inferred by the reader.
Pretty much. So the symbol for, say, a pin-tailed duck, which represented the sounds su, could stand for those consonants and u, regardless of the vowels around them.
So you could use the duck picture to write the word for sun, also pronounced su.
Precisely. Or use it as part of other words containing those sounds. They had signs for one consonant, those are called uniliterals. Signs for 2 consonants, biliterals. And signs for 3, triliterals.
And weren't there about 24 of those single sound signs, almost like an alphabet?
Yeah, around 24 uniliterals. And functionally, yes, you could theoretically write a lot of the language just using those. But the Egyptians never simplified it down to only that. They kept using all the other signs too, the biliterals, triliterals, the logograms.
Which is why there were so many signs in total. Over 1,000 initially, then maybe settling around 750, and even more later on. That sounds incredibly hard to read. How did they know which sound value a sign had, especially with no written vowels?
Well, that's where the other elements come in handy. Phonetic complements and determinatives.
Phonetic complements, what are they?
They're basically helper signs. Often uniliterals, those single sound signs, added next to a biliteral or triliteral sign. They aren't pronounced again. They just reinforce or clarify the reading of the main sign.
Wait, so you use a sign for, say, 3 sounds, and then you add extra signs for 1 or 2 of those same sounds again. Why?
To help the reader, it reduces ambiguity. The sources mention the sign for NFR, meaning beautiful or good. That's a triliteral.
Okay.
But often, you'd see the uniliteral signs for S and R written right after it. It's like confirming the ending sounds. Or take the sign for a seat. It can be read SW, let S, or etamen, depending on the word. The phonetic complements written with it would tell you which reading was intended.
Ah, I see. It's like built-in hints. That makes sense. And then there are the determinatives. You mentioned those.
Yes, determinatives are crucial. They are signs placed usually at the end of a word. They have no phonetic value. You don't pronounce them.
So what do?
They tell you the general category or meaning of the word. They clarify what kind of thing the word refers to.
Ah, okay. So that helps with words that sound the same but mean different things. Homophones.
Exactly.
Okay.
Especially vital in a script, mostly without vowels. If you had 2 words that might be spelled the same consonantally, say NFR, the determinative sign would tell you if it meant beautiful young people, maybe followed by a sign of child.
Okay.
Or if it meant foundations, followed by a sign for a house, or even wine or beer, followed by a sign of a jug.
That is actually genius. It's such an elegant way to handle the potential confusion. As a whole layer of meaning to make it readable.
It really is. And the system was flexible in other ways, too. Text could be written in columns, read top to bottom.
Or in rows.
Or in rows, read either right to left or left to right.
How did you know which way to go?
Usually you'd look at the signs themselves, the ones depicting people or animals. They almost always face the direction you should start reading from.
Clever.
And while they didn't usually put spaces between words like we do, those determinatives often kind of acted as word endings. helping you see where one word stopped and the next began.
Fascinating how they built all these visual clues right into the script. And this wasn't just carved on temples, right? They used it for everyday stuff, too.
Absolutely. Monumental inscriptions survive well because they're stone, but the sources list lots of materials. Those early labels we talked about, broken bits of pottery called ostraca, very common for quick notes or practice.
Right.
Stone, metal. But papyrus was the main thing for portable documents. Letters, literature, religious texts. We have papyrus going way back, even found in a First Dynasty tomb, Kimaka's tomb.
Wow.
They also used wooden boards coated with plaster. You could wash them and reuse them. Even some clay tablets, bone, metal, leather.
So it really was a living script, used for everything from, king lists and magic spells down to tax records and maybe homework for scribes.
Exactly. And because writing things out in full hieroglyphs could be slow, cursive forms developed for faster, everyday writing.
Ah, hieratic.
Hieratic first, yeah. It's a more flowing, kind of stylized version of the hieroglyphs. Scribes loved it, usually written in ink right to left on papyrus or ostraca.
And then later came an even more simplified version, Demotic, around the 7th century BCE.
Yes, Demotic. The name means something like writing for documents. It became the standard script for business, admin, even literary texts. It eventually replaced hieratic for most things, except maybe some religious texts.
And Demotic signs are so abbreviated, it's hard to even see the original hieroglyph picture inside them anymore.
Very difficult. They look quite different.
Okay, so you have the original picture-like hieroglyphs, the quicker hieratic, and the super-fast Demotic. 3 related scripts, but looking different, evolving for different needs over thousands of years.
And this whole family tree of scripts becomes really important because eventually, after millennia of use, the knowledge of how to read any of them just faded away.
This is where the Great Silence begins, isn't it? As ancient Egyptian civilization itself started to decline, falling under Greek rule, then Roman rule.
Right, Greek and Latin culture became more dominant, especially in administration and among the elites.
And another critical factor the sources highlight, the rise of Christianity in Egypt, starting around the 2nd century CE.
Yes, and the Christianized Egyptians, they developed a new script for their language. We call it Coptic.
Coptic, which used the Greek alphabet, didn't it? But added a few extra signs borrowed from Demotic for Egyptian sounds that Greek didn't have.
Exactly right. And Coptic was the first truly alphabetic script used for the Egyptian language. It wrote vowels as well as consonants.
Which must have made it seem much simpler.
Probably. And its rise happened at the same time as the traditional Egyptian religion. The religion tied so closely to hieroglyphs was declining.
So, as the old pagan temples were closed down, the use of hieroglyphs on public buildings just stopped.
Pretty much. The Roman Emperor Theodosius Iaphic ordering the closure of non-Christian temples in 391 AD is seen as a key moment. And the very last known inscription we have, written in proper hieroglyphs.
When was that?
It's from the Temple of Philae, dated very specifically 394 AD.
Wow, less than 400 years into the Common Era and the curtain just falls. So by the 5th century AD, basically no one could read or write hieroglyphs anymore.
Totally lost. For about 1400 years, just imagine that. All that history, all that culture, locked away in plain sight on monuments everywhere, but completely silent. Nobody could understand it.
Even Greco-Roman writers who saw the signs, they didn't get it, did they?
Not at all. They saw pictures and just assumed they were purely symbolic, maybe allegories or some kind of mystical code like you mentioned earlier.
That basic misunderstanding, thinking it was all symbols, no sounds, really held things back for centuries, didn't it?
Hugely. Scholars in the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, even brilliant people like Athanasius Kircher in the 17th century.
Yeah.
He actually knew Coptic and suspected it was related.
But
He was still stuck on the idea that each hieroglyph represented some deep mystical concept, not sounds, making up words, and without a bilingual text like a key, they were just making symbolic guesses.
Yeah.
No way to check if they were right.
a 1,400-year-old code, seemingly unbreakable until a lucky find by some soldiers?
Yes. 1799, Napoleon's expedition in Egypt. A soldier supervising some construction work near a town called Rosetta in the Nile Delta.
He finds a stone.
He finds a stone, an unassuming slab of black basalt, really, but immeasurably important.
A Rosetta Stone.
But one and only. Because on its face, there was the same text inscribed in 3 different scripts.
3 scripts. The top one was?
Hieroglyphic, the formal ancient script. The middle was Demotic, that later cursive script. And the bottom,
Ancient Greek.
ancient Greek, a language scholars could read.
That was it. The key they'd been missing for centuries. a parallel text.
A decree from Ptolemy, right?
Exactly. It was the absolute game changer. Now, scholars had a starting point. They could read the Greek and try to match to the Egyptian versions. One in the mysterious hieroglyphs, the other in the almost as mysterious Demotic. The race was on.
And the person who finally cracked it was Jean-François Champollion.
A brilliant young French scholar, a real linguistic prodigy, incredibly dedicated. He spent years obsessed with the stone. And crucially, he knew Coptic.
The later form of Egyptian, written with Greek letters.
Yes, and he believed Coptic held the linguistic clues to the older scripts. He thought it was the descendant language.
And his big aha moment, the sources really emphasize this, came when he zeroed in on the royal names. Names like Ptolemy and Cleopatra.
Which were often enclosed in those oval rings. Cartouches.
Right, cartouche.
He had this brilliant idea. Because these were foreign names, Greek rulers in Egypt, maybe the Egyptians spelled them out phonetically, sound by sound, especially inside a cartouche, marking them as royal. So kind of like sounding out an unfamiliar word.
Exactly. So he looked at the hieroglyphs inside the cartouche for Ptolemy on the Rosetta Stone itself, and then the name Cleopatra on another monument, an obelisk from Philae that also had a Greek inscription confirming the name.
And by comparing the Greek spellings of Ptolemy and Cleopatra with the hieroglyphs inside their cartouches,
he started painstakingly matching them up, figuring out which hieroglyph stood for the P sound, which for the T, which for the L sound that appeared in both names.
And that was the key that just unlocked everything. Realizing hieroglyphs weren't just pictures, weren't just symbols, but a system that used sound, phonetics.
That was the breakthrough. His famous conclusion was that the script was a complex system writing figurative, symbolic, and phonetic all at once.
The same text, the same phrase, I would almost say in the same word, yeah.
That insight, which he announced publicly in 1822, just blew the doors open. It revolutionized everything and allowed the decipherment to move forward incredibly quickly.
And just like that, well, not just like that, it took immense work. But after 1,400 years of silence, the voice of ancient Egypt could be heard again.
A floodgate opened. Suddenly, we could start reading the enormous amount of stuff they left behind, not just those early admin labels from Abydos or royal decrees like the Rosetta Stone.
But also all that amazing literature, the pyramid texts, the coffin texts we talked about.
And gain really deep insights into their beliefs, their worldview. The sources stress the magical power the Egyptians believed written words and symbols held.
Right, the script itself had potency, especially on temple walls or amulets or in funerary texts like the Book of the Dead. Writing wasn't just communication, it could do things.
Yes, the decipherment wasn't just about history and kings. It let us access their understanding of the universe, their myths, their complex ideas about the afterlife, and the crucial role they saw writing playing in making that journey successful.
What an incredible journey we've traced today. From these mysterious sacred symbols people thought were just pictures, through understanding this incredibly complex, layered system, logograms, phonograms, determinatives, then centuries of complete silence when the meaning was lost.
To the drama of the Rosetta Stone discovery and Champollion's brilliant patient work bringing it all back.
It really shows how figuring out a lost language can just unlock an entire civilization's history, their knowledge, how they saw the world.
It really highlights both the fragility of knowledge, but also the immense power locked inside a writing system.
It does, and it really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? Looking at our own world now, we rely so much on digital communication, on formats that might just vanish or become unreadable in the future. Could huge chunks of our own history, our knowledge, become as mysterious and lost to future generations as hieroglyphs were for those 1,400 years?
That long silence before 1822 is definitely a stark reminder. How easily the key can be lost, but also how profound it is when that key is found again. It makes you wonder what secrets might still be waiting in other undeciphered scripts around the world.